I sat frozen at my parents' dining table, staring at my phone screen. The DNA results had everyone in shock. My sister Heather's cruel birthday joke about me not looking like family revealed an unthinkable truth: we weren't related. But that wasn't what left everyone speechless. It was the name under 98.7% match that made my father drop his glass and my mother burst into tears. If you're watching this while scrolling through family drama stories, I can promise you've never heard one quite like mine. The moment captured above changed my entire identity and family forever. Before I continue this journey through decades of secrets, lies, and eventually healing, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Has anyone else discovered shocking family secrets? Hit subscribe if you want more real-life family stories that prove truth really is stranger than fiction. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. Growing up in Hartford, Connecticut, my sister Heather and I couldn't have been more different. At 35, Heather was 4 years older than me, the golden child who took after our father's side, tall, naturally blonde, with the kind of effortless social grace that made her high school cheerleading captain and prom queen. I was her opposite in every way, shorter with darker features, bookish and reserved. My entire childhood was spent hearing variations of, "Are you sure you're sisters?" from classmates, neighbors, even distant relatives at family gatherings. "Melissa just takes," after Catherine's grandmother, my father Richard would explain with a tight smile whenever someone commented on our differences. But I'd catch the quick, uncomfortable glances my parents exchanged. Our home movies tell the story clearly. Heather twirling in dance recitals while my parents beamed from the audience, my father's camera occasionally panning to capture me sitting quietly with a book. Family vacation photos where Heather stood center frame between our parents, while I seemed positioned as an afterthought. Christmas mornings where Heather's pile of gifts towered noticeably higher than mine. "That's just how sisters are," my mother would say, whenever I complained about Heather's treatment of me. But it went beyond normal sibling rivalry. Heather seemed to take pleasure in excluding me, starting from childhood when she'd invite every girl on our block to her birthday parties except me, claiming it wouldn't be special if I had to include my sister. In middle school, she spread rumors about me being adopted, a particularly painful barb that carried more truth than anyone realized at the time. My parents' pattern was consistent. They enabled Heather's behavior while minimizing my feelings. When I earned a perfect SAT score and early acceptance to MIT, my father's response was, "That's nice, but try not to make a big deal around Heather. She's sensitive about her college applications." Heather had applied to our father's alma mater and was waitlisted. My achievement was treated as something to hide rather than celebrate. Despite minimal family support, I graduated with honors in computer science and secured a position at a prestigious tech firm. I bought my own apartment by 26, built a respectable savings account, and created a life that was entirely mine. Heather, meanwhile, married her college boyfriend immediately after graduation, moved to a suburb identical to the one we grew up in, and seemed destined to replicate our parents' life. But her marriage collapsed after 3 years when her husband left her for his coworker. The family dynamic shifted dramatically after Heather's divorce. At 32, she moved back into our parents' house temporarily, a temporary stay that had stretched to 3 years by the time of my fateful birthday. My parents converted their home office into a bedroom for her, paid off her considerable credit card debt, and my father used his connections to secure her a marketing position at his company. During those 3 years, Heather's resentment toward me intensified. My independence and career success became sore points at every family gathering. "Not everyone can be a robot like Melissa," she'd say when my mother gently suggested job opportunities. "Some of us have actual feelings to process." The barbs grew more frequent, more pointed, especially as our parents aged and conversations about their retirement and estate planning arose. The tension culminated at my 31st birthday dinner last month. I had declined my mother's offer to host a celebration, preferring to spend the evening with friends, but she insisted on at least having a family dinner the weekend before. "Your sister has been feeling disconnected from you," she explained over the phone. "She wants to do something nice for your birthday." Against my better judgment, I agreed. I should have known better. The evening of my birthday dinner started with familiar discomfort. I parked my car in my parents' driveway, taking an extra moment to prepare myself mentally before heading inside. Their Tudor-style home in West Hartford looked exactly as it had throughout my childhood, meticulously maintained, with my mother's prized roses flanking the walkway. I'd moved only 30 minutes away, but sometimes it felt like I'd escaped to another planet. "There she is!" my mother Catherine exclaimed as I entered. She hugged me tightly, the scent of her Chanel perfume enveloping me, the same fragrance she'd worn my entire life. My father Richard glanced up from his newspaper, offering a quick "Happy birthday, kiddo," before returning to his reading. Heather emerged from the kitchen, holding a glass of white wine. "Well, if it isn't the birthday girl. Still dressing like a college student, I see." She eyed my casual jeans and sweater with thinly veiled disapproval. "Nice to see you too, Heather," I replied, already regretting my decision to come. Dinner proceeded with the usual routine, my mother asking polite questions about my work that she didn't understand, my father discussing golf with occasional references to Heather's progress at his company, and Heather making backhanded comments about my personal life. "So, still no boyfriend?" Heather asked, cutting into her salmon. "What happened to that guy from your office Christmas party? The one with the nice watch? Paul? We went on 2 dates." "It wasn't a match," I answered, taking a large sip of wine. "Well, you're not getting any younger," she continued. 31. TikTok. My mother quickly changed the subject to safer territory, her garden club's upcoming competition, while my father nodded absently, clearly mentally elsewhere. After dinner came cake and presents. My mother had baked my favorite chocolate raspberry cake, a gesture that momentarily warmed my heart. My father handed me a card containing a gift certificate to a high-end department store, the same gift he'd given me for the past 5 years, undoubtedly purchased by my mother. Then Heather pushed a small wrapped box across the table with an unusual smile that immediately put me on edge. "I put a lot of thought into this," she said, her voice saccharine. "Open it." Inside was an Ancestry DNA testing kit, complete with the saliva collection tube and prepaid return envelope. "Before I could respond," Heather continued, "I just thought it might be interesting to find out where your features actually come from, since you look nothing like the rest of us." She laughed as if she'd made a harmless joke. My parents exchanged a quick glance I couldn't interpret. My mother forced a chuckle, while my father suddenly became very interested in his cake. "That's thoughtful," I managed, placing the box back on the table. "Aren't you excited to find out your real heritage?" Heather pressed. "Maybe there's some Mediterranean blood in there, or something exotic to explain that complexion." "Heather," my mother said quietly, but without real reproach. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. I left as soon as politely possible, tossing the DNA kit into my back seat. When I arrived home, I threw it directly into my kitchen trash can, buried under coffee grounds and yesterday's takeout containers. 2 days later, our family group text blew up with plans for my father's upcoming retirement party. My mother sent a detailed list of tasks, assigning Heather to handle the guest list and speeches, while my contribution was limited to picking up ice on the way. When I suggested I could help with more substantial preparations, Heather quickly responded, "No offense, but this is for Dad's colleagues and friends. We need someone with actual people skills to coordinate." My mother sent a laughing emoji in response. That night, after a glass of wine and a particularly frustrating day at work, I found myself digging through my trash, retrieving the slightly stained DNA kit box. I sat at my kitchen counter, staring at it, a strange mix of emotions churning inside me. Perhaps it was the accumulated weight of years feeling like an outsider in my own family. Maybe it was simple curiosity about my heritage. Or maybe, if I'm being completely honest, it was spite, the desire to prove Heather wrong, to show conclusively that I was just as much a part of our family as she was, despite our differences. Whatever the motivation, I opened the box, read the instructions twice, and spit into the plastic tube. As I sealed the sample and prepared it for mailing, I imagined the smug satisfaction I'd feel showing Heather results confirming our shared ancestry. I pictured myself at the next family dinner, evidence in hand, watching her scramble for some other explanation for why I didn't fit her image of our family. I dropped the package in a mailbox the next morning on my way to work. The company estimated 4 to 6 weeks for results, and I promptly forgot about it as a major project deadline approached at work. But 3 weeks later, at 3:17 a.m., my phone pinged with a notification that would forever divide my life into before and after. Your DNA results are ready to view. I should have been asleep at 3:17 a.m. on a Tuesday, but I was still awake, finishing code for a project due later that week. When my phone pinged with the notification, I almost ignored it. Instead, I opened the email, expecting to quickly glance at results, showing predominantly Western European ancestry, matching what I knew of my family history. The ethnicity breakdown immediately confused me. According to the test, I was 43% Eastern European, 32% Italian, 15% Greek, and 10% various other ancestries. This made no sense. My family proudly traced their lineage to English and German immigrants who arrived in the 1800s. There was supposed to be some distant Scottish ancestry on my father's side and French on my mother's nothing, remotely Mediterranean or Eastern European. That can't be right, I muttered, scrolling further. That's when I saw the section labeled DNA matches, and my heart nearly stopped. The test had found no matches with any known family members. 0 shared centimorgans with anyone named Winters, my family surname. Instead, at the top of my DNA matches list was a 98.7% match with someone named Rachel Dawson. Who the hell is Rachel Dawson? I whispered to my empty apartment. I spent the rest of the night in a spiral of frantic research. I learned that DNA testing companies occasionally made errors, but a complete ethnicity mismatch seemed unlikely. I read stories of people discovering unknown adoptions or infidelity in their family trees. I browsed forums where users discussed their shocking DNA discoveries. NPE, they called it, not parent expected. By morning, I had 3 working theories. Either the test was completely wrong, I was secretly adopted, or there had been some kind of hospital mix-up at birth. None seemed plausible, yet one had to be true. I called in sick to work for the first time in my career, unable to focus on anything but the revelation that had shattered my understanding of my identity. I pulled up my birth certificate from my files, examining it for any signs of adoption. It looked completely legitimate. Hartford Memorial Hospital, 7:24 p.m. on April 16th. Parents Richard and Catherine Winters. Nothing suspicious. Next, I turned my attention to Rachel Dawson. I searched her name on every social media platform, adding Hartford as a keyword. It didn't take long to find her a woman who appeared to be my age, living in Farmington, just 30 miles away. The moment her profile photo expanded on my screen, I gasped audibly. The resemblance was unmistakable. She had my eyes, my smile, my distinctive widow's peak hairline. She even had the small mole near her right eyebrow that matched mine exactly. My hands trembling, I scrolled through her photos. Rachel was an elementary school music teacher, according to her profile. She played violin just like I had until college. She had a collection of photos with an older couple I presumed were her parents. The woman had my high cheekbones and dark hair. The man had my exact eye shape and smile. Most incredibly, I found a post from just 2 weeks earlier. Got my ancestry results back. So cool to learn about my heritage, though a bit confused by some unexpected matches. Anyone else find surprises in their DNA? The coincidence was too perfect. I sat back in my chair, trying to process the implications. If Rachel and I were nearly identical in DNA, born in the same city around the same time, and both recently took DNA tests that yielded surprising results, the conclusion seemed inevitable, yet impossible to accept. Somehow, Rachel Dawson and I had been switched at birth. I was raised by her biological parents, and she by mine. The ethical dilemma of what to do with this information consumed me. Should I message a complete stranger with news that would upend her life as thoroughly as it had mine? Should I confront my parents, or rather, the people I'd always known as my parents first? What if I was jumping to conclusions and there was a simpler explanation? I decided I needed more evidence before taking such a dramatic step. I searched for information about Hartford Memorial Hospital in the early 1990 seconds, finding scattered news articles about understaffing issues and a major renovation in 1994. Nothing about baby switches or lawsuits that might relate to my situation. I discovered Rachel's parents' names through her memorial posts about them. Karen and David Dawson had died in a car accident 3 years earlier. This detail hit me hard. If my theory was correct, these were my biological parents, people I would never have the chance to meet. After hours of research with trembling hands and a churning stomach, I decided that I needed to confront the people who raised me first. They deserved the chance to explain before I reached out to a stranger. But first, I needed to prepare myself for whatever truths or lies might emerge. Saturday arrived with leaden skies that matched my mood. I'd spent the past 3 days in a fog, going through the motions at work while internally rehearsing what I would say to my parents. I'd confirmed with my mother earlier in the week that Heather would be at a friend's baby shower that afternoon. This conversation needed to happen without her inflammatory presence. As I pulled into their driveway for the second time that month, my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I checked my phone, confirming that the voice recording app was accessible with one tap. It felt wrong to record a conversation with my parents, but something told me I would need evidence of whatever was about to transpire. My mother answered the door with surprised delight. "Melissa! What a lovely surprise! Richard, look who's here!" My father appeared from his study, reading glasses perched on his nose. "Twice in 1 month? To what do we owe this honor?" Their normalcy, their complete unawareness that their world was about to implode, nearly broke my resolve. These were the people who had bandaged my skinned knees, attended my graduation, helped me move into my first apartment. How could I believe they had been hiding something so monumental from me my entire life? "I need to talk to you both about something important," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I subtly tapped the record button on my phone as we moved to the living room. Once seated, I took a deep breath. "I have a question about my birth." My mother's smile faltered slightly. "Your birth? What about it? Were there any complications? Anything unusual about that day?" My parents exchanged a quick glance, the same look they'd shared when Heather gave me the DNA test. "No, sweetheart," my mother said. "It was a perfectly normal delivery. Why do you ask?" I pulled out my phone and opened the DNA test results. I did the test Heather gave me. My father's posture stiffened. "Those tests aren't very accurate, you know. We had a colleague at work who got completely ridiculous results." "Dad," I said firmly, "the test shows I have no genetic connection to our family. None whatsoever." I turned the screen toward them. "It also shows a 98.7% match with a woman named Rachel Dawson. She lives in Farmington. She looks exactly like me." My mother's face drained of color. "That's absurd. Those tests are completely unreliable. Mom, the statistical probability of a false result at this level is essentially zero. And I found Rachel online. She recently took a DNA test too, and posted about unexpected results." I took another steadying breath. "She was born at Hartford Memorial, just like me." My father removed his glasses, pinching the bridge of his nose. The room fell into suffocating silence. "Richard," my mother finally said, her voice thin and high, "tell her it's nonsense." Instead, my father's shoulders slumped. "There was a situation at the hospital." "Richard!" My mother's voice had turned shrill. "She deserves to know, Catherine," he said quietly. "Know what?" I demanded, my heart pounding. "Nothing," my mother interjected, standing abruptly. "This is ridiculous. Some internet test comes along and suddenly you're questioning everything. We are your parents, Melissa. We brought you home from the hospital. We raised you. This conversation is insane." "Then explain why I have none of your DNA," I challenged. "Explain why a stranger shows up as my likely sibling or twin." My mother's face contorted with a mix of anger and fear. "You're trying to destroy this family with these accusations. After everything we've done for you." "Catherine," my father said sharply. "Stop." He turned to me, his expression grave. "There was a power outage at the hospital the night you were born. It was chaotic. When they brought you to us the next morning, you looked different from what we remembered from the night before. But the nurses assured us babies change appearance in the first 24 hours. We convinced ourselves we were just tired, confused new parents. My mother collapsed back onto the sofa, burying her face in her hands. "Did you ever investigate further?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "We raised you," my mother said through her fingers. "You are our daughter. Nothing else matters. You knew, didn't you? You both knew there was a possibility I wasn't your biological child, and you never told me." The betrayal felt like a physical wound. "We loved you from the moment we saw you," my father said. "Biology or not, you are our daughter. But you treated Heather differently. Your biological daughter got every advantage, every benefit of the doubt, while I was always the outsider. The years of subtle discrimination, of feeling like I didn't belong, suddenly made painful sense." "That's not true," my mother protested weakly. "We never—" "It is true," I interrupted. "My entire life, I've felt like I didn't fit in this family, and now I know why." I stood up, gathering my belongings. "I need time to process this, and I'm going to contact Rachel Dawson." "No." My mother's head snapped up. "You can't do that. You'll destroy multiple families with this nonsense." "The truth is already out there, Mom. Rachel took a DNA test too. It's only a matter of time before she figures it out as well." As I turned to leave, my father caught my arm. "Melissa, please, don't tell Heather yet. Let us figure out how to handle this as a family." I looked into his pleading eyes I'd never fully resembled, and felt a confusing mix of anger and compassion. "I'll give you a week," I said. "Then I'm doing what I need to do." I walked out of my childhood home feeling like a stranger, the recorded conversation burning a hole in my pocket. As I sat in my car, my phone pinged with a text from my father. "We love you. Please remember that. No matter what happened at that hospital, you are our daughter." I drove home in tears, unsure if I was mourning the parents I never knew, or the truth my raising parents had withheld from me my entire life. Wait until you hear what happened next, because this story gets even more complicated. If you're finding this family journey as shocking as I did living through it, take a second to hit like or share with someone who appreciates real-life drama that puts fiction to shame. The confrontation with my parents was just the beginning of unraveling a decades-old secret that would forever change multiple families. Keep watching to see what happened when I finally connected with my biological sister. The week after confronting my parents passed in a blur of sleepless nights and distracted days. I couldn't focus on work, couldn't eat properly, couldn't engage in normal conversations with friends. My entire identity felt unmoored, floating in a void between what I'd always believed and what I now suspected was true. After careful consideration, I decided to contact Rachel through the DNA testing platform's messaging system, keeping my initial message cautious. "Hello, Rachel. My name is Melissa Winters. According to our DNA test results, we appear to be closely related, potentially siblings. I was born at Hartford Memorial on April 16th. If you're open to it, I think we should discuss these results. Sincerely, Melissa." Her response came within hours. "Melissa, I've been staring at your name in my matches for days, trying to work up the courage to message you. I was born at Hartford Memorial on April 16th as well. I think we need to talk. Would you be comfortable meeting in person, Rachel?" We arranged to meet at a coffee shop in Farmington, halfway between our homes. I arrived 20 minutes early, my stomach in knots, and chose a quiet table in the corner. When Rachel walked through the door, it was like seeing myself in slightly different clothing. She had the same height, the same walk, the same way of tucking hair behind her ear that I did. Our eyes met across the room, and I knew she felt the same shock of recognition. "Melissa?" she asked, approaching my table. "Rachel," I confirmed, standing awkwardly. "Do you shake hands with someone who might be your biological sister? Hug them?" We settled for both, a strange handshake that turned into a brief, tense embrace. "This is surreal," she said, sitting across from me. Her voice had the same slight raspiness as mine. "You look just like you," I finished. We ordered coffee and sat in stunned silence for a moment, each taking in the mirror image across the table. "I brought some things," Rachel finally said, reaching into her bag. She produced a folder containing birth records, baby photos, and hospital bracelets. When I got the DNA results, I started gathering evidence. I've always been a bit of an organizer. Me too, I admitted, pulling out my own folder of documents. My colleagues teased me about my color coding system. We exchanged an uncertain smile, the first crack in the tension. Over the next 2 hours, we pieced together the puzzle of our lives. Rachel had been raised as the only child of Karen and David Dawson. They had died 3 years earlier in a car accident on their way home from their anniversary dinner, a loss that still visibly pained her. After they died, I found some strange notes in my mother's personal files, Rachel explained, pushing a plastic-protected letter across the table. This was in an envelope marked, "For Rachel, if needed." The handwritten letter was dated October 1993, 6 months after our birth. Dearest Rachel, if you're reading this, something has happened to your father and me, and you've found yourself with questions about your birth. Shortly after we brought you home, we received an anonymous letter suggesting there might have been a mix-up at the hospital during the power outage the night you were born. We investigated quietly but found no conclusive evidence. We chose not to pursue it further, because by then, you were our daughter in every way that mattered. We couldn't bear the thought of potentially losing you, even if there had been a mistake. We love you completely and without reservation. You are our daughter, regardless of biology. Love always, Mom and Dad. My hands trembled as I read the letter. They knew, I whispered. They suspected, just like my parents did. Both sets of parents chose to keep us, Rachel said softly. I don't know whether to feel loved or betrayed. Both, I said. Definitely both. Rachel shared that she had always felt some disconnect from her parents, despite their loving relationship. My mom and dad were both musically gifted. Mom played piano. Dad was a choir director. I had their talent, but physically, I never resembled either of them. People always asked if I was adopted. Meanwhile, I grew up with parents and a sister I looked nothing like, with completely different interests and temperaments, I added. I pursued computer science while my family was all business and marketing people. I always felt like the odd one out. As we continued talking, the coincidences multiplied. We discovered we both had played violin from childhood. Both were allergic to shellfish. Both had perfect pitch. Rachel pulled up a photo of her biological mother, my mother, Catherine, at age 30. The resemblance to Rachel was striking. What do we do with this information? Rachel asked, after we'd exhausted our initial questions. I can't confront my parents, they're gone. But yours. Mine have some explaining to do, I said firmly. And there's more complication. I have a sister, your biological sister Heather. I have a sister? Rachel looked stunned. I always wanted siblings. Trust me. You might revise that opinion after meeting Heather, I said with a dry laugh. Is she the one who gave you the DNA test? Yes, as a cruel joke about how I didn't look like the family. Ironic, isn't it? Rachel shook her head in disbelief. There's one more thing I should tell you, she said hesitantly. I'm pregnant. 4 months along. That's partly why these DNA results became so urgent for me. I need to know my actual medical history. The news hit me hard. This woman, who was essentially my twin, was carrying a child. A child who would be my biological niece or nephew. The consequences of our switched identities continued to ripple outward, affecting not just us but future generations. We need answers, I said decisively. Not just for us, but for your baby too. I think we should investigate the hospital records, find out exactly what happened that night. Rachel nodded in agreement. And then we confront everyone involved. Together, as we parted that day, we hugged again, a real hug this time, lingering and meaningful. We had entered the coffee shop as strangers and left as something else, biological sisters, unlikely friends, and allies in the search for truth. The Monday after meeting Rachel, I took a personal day from work. We had agreed to meet at Hartford Memorial Hospital to request our birth records together, presenting a united front. The hospital had undergone several renovations since our birth 31 years ago, but the administrative offices remained in the East Wing. I'm nervous, Rachel admitted as we approached the records department. She rested a hand on her slightly rounded belly, a gesture I'd noticed she made when anxious. Me too, I confessed. But we deserve answers. The records clerk, a middle-aged woman named Janet with kind eyes and practical shoes, listened patiently as we explained our situation, the DNA test, the physical resemblance, the shared birthday. We need to see all records related to our births, I explained. Delivery room logs, nurse notes, anything that might explain what happened. Janet's expression grew sympathetic but firm. I understand this is important to you both, but there are strict protocols around releasing medical records, especially from that long ago. The most I can do is provide your own individual birth certificates, which you already have. There has to be something you can do, Rachel pleaded. This isn't just curiosity, I'm pregnant, and I need accurate medical history for my child's health. Janet glanced around to ensure no one was listening, then lowered her voice. Look, I shouldn't do this, but my own sister discovered she was donor conceived at 48. I know what it's like to need answers. She typed something into her computer. The records from that era aren't all digitized. They're in storage in the basement. I can request them, but it will take a few days. We would be incredibly grateful, I said. Come back Thursday afternoon. I'll see what I can find, Janet said, writing our contact information on a notepad. But I can't promise anything. While waiting for Thursday, Rachel and I consulted with a medical malpractice attorney recommended by a colleague. Lawrence Bennett was in his 60s, with salt and pepper hair and reading glasses that perpetually slid down his nose. The statute of limitations for medical malpractice in Connecticut is generally 2 years from the date of injury, or from when the injury should reasonably have been discovered, he explained after hearing our story. However, in cases of fraudulent concealment, which this might qualify as the statute can be extended. So we could still sue the hospital? Rachel asked. Potentially, Bennett said cautiously. But there are significant hurdles. You'd need to prove negligence, and after 31 years, many records may be missing, staff retired or deceased. More concerningly, you'd need to explain why your parents' both sets didn't pursue this decades ago when they apparently had suspicions. I hadn't considered this angle. So our parents' inaction could prevent us from seeking justice? It complicates things, Bennett admitted. But there's another avenue to consider. If hospital administrators actively concealed evidence of the switch to avoid liability, that could potentially constitute criminal concealment or fraud. The statute of limitations for fraud is longer, typically 3 years from discovery in Connecticut. We left the consultation with more questions than answers, but with a clearer understanding of our legal options. The decision to pursue legal action would depend largely on what we discovered in the hospital records. On Thursday, we returned to the hospital. Janet ushered us into a small conference room where several manila folders sat on the table. I found your birth records, she said, but also something else. She pulled out a thin file labeled Incident Report, April 16 to 17, 1993. This was cross-referenced with both your names. With trembling hands, I opened the incident report. It detailed a hospital-wide power outage beginning at 7:13 p.m. on April 16, lasting until 4:27 a.m. on April 17. Emergency generators had functioned properly for critical systems, but certain areas experienced lighting issues, including the nursery. The report included nurses' notes documenting the chaotic conditions during the night shift. One entry, timed at 2:15 a.m., specifically mentioned, infants Winters and Dawson temporarily removed from bassinets during cleaning after power restoration. Proper identification confirmed before returning to bassinets. This could be when it happened, Rachel whispered. Further notes indicated that night shift was understaffed due to a nurse calling in sick. The supervising nurse, Eleanor Winters, no relation to my family, had documented concerns about protocol violations during the power outage, but noted that all infants confirmed with correct families at morning handover. We need to talk to Eleanor Winters, I said decisively. Janet had anticipated this request. She's retired now, but still lives locally. She volunteers at the hospital gift shop on Tuesdays. She slid a post-it note with an address across the table. That's the retirement community where she lives. I didn't tell you this, she added firmly. The following Tuesday, We found ourselves sitting in the tidy living room of Eleanor Winter's apartment at Riverside Retirement Community. At 78, Eleanor remained sharp and direct, her white hair cut in a practical bob, her posture still reflecting her nursing background. "I remember that night vividly," she said after we explained why we were there. "Power outages were unusual, but not unheard of. What made that night different was the timing, 2 deliveries within 30 minutes of each other, and then the lights going out just as we were processing the newborns." "What exactly happened?" Rachel asked. Eleanor sighed heavily. There was confusion. The backup generator kicked in for essential equipment, but the lighting was dim. We had to move the babies from the delivery area to the nursery using flashlights. The ID bracelets were supposed to be secured immediately after birth, but she trailed off. "But they weren't?" I prompted. "They were, but during the cleaning procedure, after the power came back, a new nurse, Margaret, I think her name was, removed them temporarily. Against protocol." Eleanor shook her head. "I came in during morning shift and noticed discrepancies in the log. When I questioned staff, they insisted everything was in order. I had my doubts, but without evidence." "Did you report your concerns?" Rachel asked. "I documented everything and reported to administration. 2 days later, I was called into a meeting with hospital legal counsel and administrators. They reviewed the case and declared there was insufficient evidence of any mix-up. I was instructed to close the incident report." "And you just accepted that?" I couldn't keep the accusation from my voice. Eleanor's eyes flashed. "I did not just accept anything, young lady. I insisted on contacting the families, but was overruled by administration. They were terrified of lawsuits. When I threatened to reach out independently, I was reminded of my confidentiality agreement and professional obligations." She looked down at her hands. "I compromised by sending anonymous notes to both families suggesting they might want to verify their babies' identities. I never knew if they received them." "My parents did," Rachel said quietly. "They kept it secret." "As did mine," I added. Eleanor looked genuinely distressed. "I've thought about that night many times over the years. I should have done more." As we prepared to leave, Eleanor grasped both our hands. "What will you do now?" Rachel and I exchanged glances. "We're going to confront our families," I said. "All of them, together." "And then?" Eleanor asked. "We don't know yet," Rachel admitted. "There are legal options, but they're complicated," I finished. And regardless of what happened at the hospital, our parents made their own decisions to hide the truth from us. On the drive back, Rachel was thoughtful. "I'm not sure I want to sue the hospital," she said finally. "Even if we could win, what would it accomplish? The people who made those decisions are probably long gone." "I'm more disturbed by our parents' choices," I agreed. "The hospital made a terrible mistake, but our parents had years, decades to tell us the truth. They chose not to." "For what it's worth," Rachel said softly, "I think they all truly believed they were protecting us. Misguided, but not malicious." "Maybe," I conceded. "But we deserve to hear them admit it. No more secrets." We spent the rest of the drive planning our approach for the family confrontation that would finally bring decades of secrets into the open. Planning the confrontation required delicate strategy. Rachel and I agreed that all parties needed to be present simultaneously, my parents, Heather, and Rachel, to prevent any possibility of coordinated denial or story alignment. The location needed to be private but neutral. Finally, we settled on my parents' home on a Sunday afternoon when my father would normally be watching golf and unlikely to refuse our request to visit. I called my mother with a deliberate vagueness. "Mom, there's something important I need to discuss with you and Dad this Sunday. Heather should be there too." "Is everything all right?" she asked, concern evident in her voice. "We can discuss everything Sunday," I replied, avoiding the direct lie. Rachel and I agreed to arrive separately, with me entering first and Rachel waiting in her car until I texted her. I would ensure everyone was seated in the living room before her dramatic entrance. Sunday arrived with perfect, dramatic weather, dark clouds, threatening rain, occasional rumbles of thunder in the distance. I drove to my parents' house with a folder of evidence, the DNA results, hospital records, and a recording device in my purse. My hands were steady now, the trembling uncertainty replaced by resolute determination. Heather's car was already in the driveway when I arrived. I took a deep breath, texted Rachel a quick 30 minutes estimate, and walked to the door. "Melissa," my father greeted me with cautious warmth. The past week of silence had clearly unsettled him. "Come in." My mother hovered in the hallway, attempting a bright smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We're all in the living room. I made those lemon squares you liked as a child." Heather sat on the couch, scrolling through her phone, barely acknowledging my arrival. "Finally gracing us with your presence," she muttered. "I'm glad you're all here," I said, setting my purse down deliberately. "I have something important to share with you." "You're not dying, are you?" Heather asked, finally looking up. "Mom's been freaking out all morning." "No, I'm not dying." I sat in the armchair facing all of them. "This is about the DNA test result." The atmosphere in the room instantly shifted. My father's shoulders tensed. My mother froze halfway to her seat, and Heather's expression changed from boredom to sudden interest. "I thought we discussed this," my mother said tightly. "Those tests are notoriously inaccurate." "Actually, they're extremely accurate," I countered. "And mine led me to some very interesting discoveries." I pulled out my phone and sent a quick text to Rachel. "Now, Melissa," my father began, "whatever you think you've discovered." The doorbell rang, cutting him off mid-sentence. My mother looked confused. "Are you expecting someone?" "We all are, in a way," I said. "Dad, would you get the door, please?" He hesitated, then complied. We heard the front door open, followed by a sharp intake of breath. A moment later, my father returned to the living room, his face ashen. Behind him walked Rachel. The effect was immediate and dramatic. My mother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Heather actually stood up, her phone clattering to the floor. "Everyone, this is Rachel Dawson," I said into the stunned silence. "According to our DNA test results, she is my biological sister, and Heather's biological sister as well." "What is this?" Heather demanded, her voice higher than normal. "Who is she? Why does she look exactly like you?" "Perhaps Mom and Dad would like to explain," I said, turning to my parents. They've had 31 years to prepare this speech. My father sank heavily onto the couch. "Catherine," he said quietly to my mother, "it's time." My mother remained standing, her body rigid with denial. "This is absurd. I don't know what you think you're doing, Melissa, but bringing a stranger into our home to make these accusations—" "I have the hospital records," I interrupted, pulling them from my folder. "We spoke to the nurse who was there that night. We know about the power outage, about the babies being mixed up, about the anonymous notes sent to both families." "You received one of those notes, didn't you?" Rachel asked softly, "just like my parents did." The mention of her parents seemed to break something in my mother. She collapsed into her chair, tears beginning to stream down her face. "Someone explain what the hell is going on," Heather demanded, looking frantically between all of us. My father took a deep breath. "There was a power outage the night you were born, Melissa, or rather, the night Rachel was born. When the lights came back on, there was confusion in the nursery. The babies were mixed up." "You're saying Melissa isn't really my sister?" Heather asked incredulously. "Biologically? No," my father confirmed. "Rachel is your biological sister. Melissa is the biological daughter of Karen and David Dawson. And you, KNEW?" Heather's voice rose to a shout. "You knew all this time and never said anything?" This reaction surprised me. I had expected Heather to be smug, vindicated in her lifelong assertion that I didn't belong. Instead, she looked furious. And her anger was directed not at me, but at our parents. "We suspected," my mother admitted through tears. "We received an anonymous letter when you girls were about 6 months old. It suggested there might have been a mix-up and recommended testing." "And you chose not to test?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "By then, you were our daughter," my father said, his voice breaking. "We had fed you, changed you, watched you smile for the first time. The thought of potentially having to give you up, of legal battles with strangers, we couldn't bear it. So we destroyed the letter and never spoke of it again." "Except you did speak of it," Heather said accusingly. "I heard you arguing about it when I was 12. I heard Mom say, "She's still our daughter. Biology doesn't matter." I thought you were talking about me, that I was adopted or something. When you explained I wasn't, I assumed it must be Melissa. This revelation stunned me. That's why you started the adoption rumors in middle school? Because you overheard them talking about me? Heather looked uncomfortable. I was a kid. I was confused and scared. And then when you didn't look like anyone in the family, it seemed to make sense. So the DNA test birthday gift, I began. I wanted to know for sure, Heather admitted. I've wondered for years, but never had the courage to ask directly. I thought the test would either disprove my suspicions or force them to tell the truth. I turned to Rachel, who had been quietly observing this family drama unfold. Your parents suspected too. They left you a letter explaining their decision. Rachel nodded, pulling out the letter and handing it to my father. He read it silently, then passed it to my mother and Heather. They made the same choice we did, my father said softly after reading it. No, I corrected him. They made a choice to prepare Rachel for the possibility of learning the truth someday. You chose to hide it forever. An uncomfortable silence filled the room. Finally, my mother spoke. What do you want from us, Melissa? We raised you, loved you, gave you everything we could. Accept the truth, I said, and accept equal treatment with your biological daughter. My mother flinched. We never intentionally favored Heather. Heather let out a harsh laugh. Mom, even I know that's not true. You always treated us differently. Because I was trying to compensate, my mother burst out. I was terrified Melissa would somehow sense she wasn't ours biologically. I overcompensated with you, Heather, to avoid showing any bias. It was wrong. I see that now. But I was so afraid of losing her. You did lose me, I said quietly. Not because of biology, but because of lies. Every time I felt like an outsider in this family, every time my accomplishments were downplayed to spare Heather's feelings, every time you allowed her to treat me as less than, those were the moments you lost me. The room fell silent again, broken only by my mother's quiet sobs. What happens now? My father finally asked. Rachel and I exchanged glances. We're still figuring that out, I said. But there's something else you should know. I nodded to Rachel. I'm pregnant, Rachel said. 4 months along. Your biological grandchild, she added, looking at my parents. This news seemed to hit my mother particularly hard. She looked at Rachel's slightly rounded belly with a complex expression of longing, grief, and something like hope. We're not here to tear families apart, Rachel continued gently. What's done is done. But we do deserve to know our histories, our medical backgrounds. And, she hesitated, perhaps we can find a way forward that acknowledges all these connections rather than denying them. Heather surprised me again by standing up and walking directly to Rachel. She studied her face intently. You have our grandmother's eyes, she said. The real shape, not like in photos. She turned to me. And you do look just like Rachel's parents in those pictures you showed me. You've seen pictures? My father asked, confused. Melissa and I met for coffee last week, Heather admitted. After I saw the initial DNA results, I wanted to understand better. This secret meeting was news to me. You never told me you saw the results. Heather shrugged uncomfortably. Mom showed me after you left that day. I went through your trash and found the testing company information. I created an account and figured out how to view shared matches. When I saw Rachel's name, you looked her up too, I realized. I needed to know if I was crazy for all those years, thinking you weren't really my sister, Heather said. Turns out I was right, but I'm not happy about it. She turned to our parents. You should have told us. Both of us. We deserve to know. My mother wiped her tears, visibly trying to collect herself. You're right, she said, surprising everyone. We thought we were protecting you both, but we were really protecting ourselves from facing a difficult truth. She looked between Rachel and me. I don't know if you can forgive us, but I hope someday you'll understand we made what seemed like the only possible choice at the time. I understand the choice to keep the babies you had bonded with, I said carefully. What I don't understand is the choice to maintain the lie for 31 years, even as both Heather and I clearly sensed something was wrong. Fear, my father said simply. Fear becomes a prison of its own making. The longer we kept the secret, the more impossible it seemed to reveal it. As the confrontation gradually shifted into a more measured conversation, we began discussing practical matters, medical histories, legal considerations, how to navigate these new family connections. No firm decisions were made that day, but the foundation was laid for a different kind of relationship, one built on truth rather than secrets. As Rachel and I prepared to leave, Heather approached me awkwardly. "For what it's worth," she said, not quite meeting my eyes, "I always wished we were closer. I just didn't know how to connect with you when everything felt off." "Maybe we start over," I suggested. "Not as biological sisters, but as people who shared a childhood and who both just had their worlds turned upside down." She nodded, then surprised me with a brief, stiff hug. "I'd like that." Outside, as Rachel and I walked to our cars, the threatening storm finally broke, rain pouring down in a symbolic cleansing. "Well," Rachel said, "that was intense, I finished, but necessary." "What do you think happens next?" she asked. "I have no idea," I admitted, "but for the first time, whatever it is will be based on truth." Watching this so far has been quite a journey, hasn't it? If you're as invested as I was while living through this emotional confrontation, take a quick moment to hit like. It helps others find this story who might be dealing with family secrets of their own. The most shocking revelations were now in the open, but figuring out what our new family reality would look like was just beginning. Stay with me as I share how we all processed this truth bomb and what our family looks like today. In the weeks following the confrontation, I entered what my therapist called an identity reformation period. Dr. Abigail Fuller specialized in family trauma and identity issues, and within minutes of our first session, I knew she was the right person to help me navigate this emotional labyrinth. "What you're experiencing is similar to what adoptees feel during reunion," she explained during our second session, "except you didn't know you were adopted, or in your case, switched at birth. That adds a layer of betrayal trauma on top of the identity questions." I had taken an extended leave of absence from work, unable to focus on coding when my entire personal foundation had been shaken. My boss had been surprisingly understanding when I'd explained the situation. "Take the time you need," he'd said. "This isn't something you can process in a weekend." He was right. The questions swirled endlessly. Who would I have been if raised by my biological parents? Had the Dawson's death robbed me of the chance to know the people whose DNA I carried? Did biology matter when the people who raised me had shaped every aspect of my personality and opportunities? "There's no single answer," Dr. Fuller reminded me. "Identity is both formed and innate. Some aspects of who you are likely come from your biological parents, certain talents, predispositions. Other aspects were shaped by your environment and the parents who raised you." I spent much of this period in self-imposed isolation, declining invitations from friends who couldn't possibly understand what I was experiencing. The one exception was Rachel, with whom I exchanged daily texts and weekly coffee meetings. Our connection deepened rapidly, skipping the usual getting-to-know-you phase of friendship and moving directly into something that felt like we'd known each other our entire lives, which, in a biological sense, we had. Rachel was processing her own complex emotions about our situation while preparing for motherhood. "I keep thinking about what my parents would say if they were here," she told me during one of our meetings. "Part of me is angry they didn't tell me the truth before they died, but another part understands they were protecting what they saw as our family unit." One unexpected development during this period came in the form of a text from Heather 3 weeks after the confrontation. "Can we meet? Just us." We arranged to meet at a park near my apartment. I found Heather already there, sitting on a bench, looking uncharacteristically subdued in jeans and a plain sweater rather than her usual carefully coordinated outfit. "Thanks for coming," she said as I sat beside her. "I've been doing a lot of thinking." "Me too," I acknowledged. "I owe you an apology," she said, surprising me. "Actually, about a lifetime of apologies." "Heather—" "No, let me finish," she interrupted. "I've been awful to you for as long as I can remember. The adoption rumors, the constant comparisons, the snide comments about you not belonging, it was all rooted in something I overheard but didn't understand as a kid. Instead of asking our parents directly, I took it out on you." Her candor caught me off guard. "I appreciate that," I said carefully. "But I think our parents set us up for a complicated relationship from the beginning." "They did," Heather agreed. "But I was old enough to make my own choices by high school, certainly by adulthood. I chose to continue the pattern because it was easier than confronting the weird dynamic in our family." She looked directly at me. "I'm sorry, Melissa, truly." "I'm sorry too," I offered. "I withdrew and assumed the worst of you, instead of trying harder to connect." "So where do we go from here?" Heather asked. "We're not biological sisters, but we're not exactly strangers either. Maybe we can be friends," I suggested. "Start fresh, without the baggage of competing for the same parental attention." Heather smiled, a genuine smile without the usual edge. "I'd like to try that." This conversation marked the beginning of a tentative but authentic relationship between us. For the first time, we began texting about mundane things, a movie Heather had seen, a book I'd enjoyed without the undercurrent of competition that had previously defined our interactions. Meanwhile, my relationship with my parents entered what Dr. Fuller called the renegotiation phase. After 2 weeks of minimal contact following the confrontation, I agreed to their request for a family therapy session. The session was raw and painful. My mother cried through most of it, while my father struggled to articulate his feelings about the choices they had made. "We never stopped loving you," he insisted. "Not for a single day." "Love isn't the issue," I responded. "Trust is. You built our entire family relationship on a fundamental lie. We thought we were protecting you," my mother said through tears. "But you were really protecting yourselves," I countered. "And in the process, you allowed me to feel like I didn't belong for 31 years. The therapist guided us toward establishing new boundaries and expectations. This relationship needs to be rebuilt on honesty," she emphasized, "which means acknowledging the harm done, even when the intentions were protective." By the 4th month after the revelation, new family patterns began to emerge. Rachel's pregnancy provided a focal point that brought various combinations of us together. When she invited me to her baby shower, I hesitantly asked if my parents, her biological parents, could attend. "I was going to suggest that," Rachel said, "and would it be weird if I invited Heather too? I know she's not biologically related to me, but she's part of this strange family constellation we're creating." The baby shower became the first event where all parties were present. Rachel and her husband Michael, me, Heather, and my parents. The awkwardness was palpable initially, with my mother hovering uncertainly around Rachel, clearly wanting to connect but unsure how to approach her biological daughter. I watched as Rachel gently guided my mother into a conversation about family medical history, a practical entry point that allowed them to begin forming a connection. My father, less emotional but equally affected, found common ground with Michael discussing their shared interest in classic cars. Heather surprised everyone by arriving with an elegantly wrapped gift, a handcrafted wooden music box that played Brahms' Lullaby. "I remembered you mentioning you teach music," she told Rachel. "I thought this might be nice for the baby." The genuine thoughtfulness of the gesture moved Rachel to tears, hormones amplifying her emotional response. As I watched her embrace Heather, I felt a complex mix of emotions, a lingering sadness for what might have been had we all known the truth earlier, but also appreciation for the new connections forming. The legal aspect of our situation resolved more straightforwardly than we had initially feared. After consulting with Attorney Bennett again, Rachel and I decided against pursuing action against the hospital. The statute of limitations, complications, combined with the hospital's changed ownership over the decades, made litigation seem like an exhausting process with limited potential benefit. Instead, we negotiated directly with the current hospital administration, presenting our evidence and requesting compensation for genetic testing, therapy expenses, and access to comprehensive medical records. Faced with the possibility of negative publicity, they agreed to a modest settlement that included coverage of these expenses rather than punitive damages. "It doesn't change what happened," Rachel acknowledged as we signed the agreement, "but it acknowledges it, and it helps us move forward." Moving forward took different forms for each of us. My relationship with my parents gradually stabilized into something more honest. if permanently altered. The artifice of perfection that had characterized our family dynamics fell away, allowing for more authentic interactions. My mother, in particular, seemed relieved to abandon the pretense, becoming more direct in her communication with both me and Heather. Heather and I established a friendship that, while still occasionally awkward, contained moments of genuine connection that had never existed in our childhood relationship. She began dating a kind, steady man who seemed to bring out her better qualities, and I found myself actually enjoying her company during our now regular coffee meetings. My relationship with Rachel deepened into something that defied conventional categorization, not quite sisters in the traditional sense, but connected by biology, shared experience, and growing affection. As her pregnancy progressed, I found myself increasingly invested in the health and well-being of her baby, my biological niece or nephew. The most unexpected development came during a conversation with Rachel in her 7th month. "Michael and I have been talking," she said hesitantly. "We'd like you to be the baby's guardian if anything happens to us." I was stunned by the request. "Are you sure? We've only known each other for a few months." "In some ways, I feel like I've known you my whole life," Rachel said. "And there's no one else I'd trust more to raise my child with an understanding of her complex family history." She smiled. "Besides, you'd give her the best shot at developing her programming genes." I agreed, deeply moved by her trust in me. This new responsibility crystallized something I'd been feeling, but hadn't fully articulated. Despite the painful circumstances of our discovery, the expansion of my family connections had enriched my life in ways I couldn't have anticipated. Dr. Fuller described this as post-traumatic growth, the positive psychological changes that can emerge from life crises. "You've been through a profound disruption of your identity and family narrative," she explained. "But you're building something new and potentially richer from those broken pieces." As Rachel's due date approached, I found myself settling into this new family configuration, imperfect, complicated, but increasingly authentic. The old family myths had been destroyed, but in their place, something more honest was taking root. Exactly 1 year after receiving those fateful DNA results, I found myself in the maternity ward of Hartford Memorial Hospital, the very place where our lives had been accidentally redirected 32 years earlier. This time, however, I wasn't a newborn being mistakenly switched, but the birth coach and designated guardian for Rachel as she brought her daughter into the world. "Push!" the doctor encouraged as Rachel gripped my hand with surprising strength. "You've got this," I assured her, wiping sweat from her forehead with a cool cloth. Her husband Michael stood on her other side, his face a mixture of terror and elation. After 17 hours of labor, Elizabeth Karen Catherine Dawson made her entrance at 3:42 a.m., weighing 7 pounds, 6 ounces, with a full head of dark hair and lungs that worked perfectly from the first cry. "She's beautiful," Rachel whispered, cradling her daughter for the first time. She looked up at me with exhausted eyes. "She has your chin." "Our chin," I corrected gently, studying the tiny features that somehow combined aspects of Rachel, Michael, and our shared genetic heritage. When the nurse asked if Auntie would like to hold the baby, I felt a surge of emotion as Elizabeth was placed in my arms. This small person carried my DNA, connecting me to both past and future in a way I hadn't anticipated. In her face, I could see echoes of the photos I'd seen of Karen Dawson, the woman who had given birth to me but never raised me, and wondered what she would think of her granddaughter. In the waiting room, an unlikely gathering had assembled, despite the early hour. My parents, Catherine and Richard, Heather, and even Eleanor Winters, the retired nurse, whose anonymous notes had attempted to alert our families decades earlier. "She's here," I announced, stepping into the waiting area. "Mother and baby are doing great." My mother stepped forward tentatively. "What did they name her?" "Elizabeth Karen Catherine," I replied, watching her face register the middle names, one for Rachel's mother, one for mine. Rachel wanted to honor both grandmothers. Catherine's eyes filled with tears. That's very generous of her." Heather, who had arrived bearing an enormous stuffed giraffe, surprised me with a quick hug. "Congratulations, Aunt Melissa." The evolution of our relationship over the past year had been one of the most unexpected developments of this journey. The dissolution of the false narrative that had defined our childhood had freed us both to discover who we might be to each other without the burden of forced sisterhood. What emerged was a genuine friendship based on shared history and newfound honesty. "When can we see the baby?" she asked. "Rachel said to send you in 2 at a time once she's settled in her recovery room." While the others waited their turn, I stepped outside the hospital for a moment of quiet reflection. The spring morning was breaking clear and cool, so different from the stormy day when we'd confronted our families a year earlier. The anniversary had prompted me to create a new tradition, an annual DNA kit dinner with Rachel, reclaiming Heather's cruel gift as the catalyst for truth that, despite its painful revelations, had ultimately enriched all our lives. When I returned inside, I found Heather emerging from Rachel's room. "She's asking for you," she said, wiping away what looked suspiciously like tears. "That kid is seriously cute." I found Rachel sitting up in bed, Elizabeth sleeping peacefully in her arms. "Your parents just left," she said. "Your mom asked if she could come help once we're home." I said yes. The relationship between Rachel and my mother, her biological mother, had developed gradually over the past year. Beginning with practical discussions of family medical history, it had evolved into something neither quite mother-daughter nor quite friendship, but a unique connection that acknowledged their biological bond while respecting the parents who had raised Rachel. "How do you feel about that?" I asked, settling into the chair beside her bed. "Good, actually. She knows she's not replacing my mom, but she has grandmotherly wisdom to share." Rachel adjusted Elizabeth's blanket. "Plus, free childcare from someone genetically invested in my kid? I'm not turning that down." I laughed, recognizing the practical streak we shared, a trait that, according to my father, came directly from my biological father, David Dawson, who had been a pragmatic software engineer. These discoveries of shared traits crossing biological and raising family lines had fascinated us throughout the year. My programming aptitude, it turned out, likely came from David, while Rachel's musical talent matched Heather's. Despite having no genetic connection, they both had perfect pitch and played multiple instruments. Nature and nurture intertwined in ways that defied simple categorization. As I held Elizabeth again, Heather returned with her phone. "Family photo?" she suggested. "Definitely," Rachel agreed. "Get in here, both of you." Heather positioned herself on one side of the bed while I stood on the other, still holding Elizabeth. As she prepared to take the selfie, the door opened, and my parents peered in. "Sorry," my father said. "We can come back." "No, join us," Rachel called. "Everyone who's here for Elizabeth should be in her first family photo." As my parents hesitantly entered the frame and Eleanor was waved in from the hallway, I looked around at this improbable gathering: biological connections, raising connections, chosen connections, all intermingled in ways no family tree could adequately represent. Heather captured the moment, then showed us the result. "That's one for the Weird Family album," she joked, but her tone was affectionate. Looking at the image, all of us surrounding Rachel and her newborn daughter, our expressions ranging from joy to wonder to lingering uncertainty, I was struck by how far we had come in a year. The DNA test that had been intended as a cruel joke had instead initiated a journey toward authenticity that none of us could have anticipated. Later, as I drove home from the hospital, exhausted but content, I reflected on the strange path that had led us here. The destruction of our family mythology had been painful, even traumatic, but from those broken pieces, we had constructed something new. A family defined not by biology alone, nor by shared history alone, but by the daily choice to remain connected despite the complicated truth. The DNA test had revealed that I wasn't who I thought I was. But paradoxically, that revelation had set me on a path to become more authentically myself than ever before. The outsider feeling that had plagued me throughout childhood now made perfect sense, and in understanding it, I had finally found where I belonged. My phone pinged with a text from Rachel. "Elizabeth just opened her eyes. They're exactly like yours." I smiled at the message. 1 year ago, a cruel prank had revealed a devastating truth. Today, that truth had expanded rather than diminished my sense of family. Sometimes, it seemed, You need to completely dismantle what you thought was true in order to build something authentic in its place. That's the end of my story, from family outsider to the center of a uniquely blended family, all because of a DNA test meant to mock me. I've learned that family isn't just about whose DNA you share, but about the choices we make every day to care for each other, even when it's complicated. If you've stayed with me through this entire journey, I'd be grateful if you'd hit subscribe to hear more stories about family, identity, and finding truth. Drop a comment below and let me know if you've ever discovered unexpected family connections or had to redefine what family means to you. Every like and share helps others find this story who might be going through similar family revelations. Thank you for witnessing my journey from family secret to family truth. Sometimes the most painful discoveries lead to the most authentic connections.